My name is Lacey Leone McLaughlin, and this is Unfolding Leadership. Amy Aniobi is an award-winning writer, director, producer, and is currently under an overall deal with HBO and HBO Max. She is the founder of a production company, SuperSpecial, and an industry incubator, Tribe. Amy most recently directed multiple episodes of Rap Shit on Max and Survival of the Thickest on Netflix, and also previously served as the executive producer on Insecure, was the showrunner and head writer on Two Dope Queens from HBO. Prior to that, she was a consultant on Brothers in Atlanta, a story editor on Silicon Valley, and a staff writer on the Michael J. Fox Show for NBC. She also recently co-hosted a comedy and wellness podcast, The Antidote, named one of the best podcasts by Guardian for 2022. I am so honored to have Amy closing out our season. Let's dive in. I am so excited to have you here today. Before we jump in, talk to me a little bit about who you are, what's your origin story. Let our audience get to know you a bit, Amy.
Oh, of course. My name is Amy Aniobi. I'm a writer, director, producer. I'm the founder of a production company and talent incubator called SuperSpecial. We have a deal at HBO and Max in television. And where people might know my work from, I've written for a number of HBO shows, but the two biggest ones at the front of other people's consciousness, I think, would be Silicon Valley. I wrote for season 2, and then Insecure. I wrote for all 5 seasons and directed in the final season too.
Yeah. Not gonna lie, gigantic fan and so excited to have you on for all of the writing that you've done and the content you've put out in the world, but also to go from writer creator to entrepreneur, business leader, and people manager has I'm just excited about that, and I'm excited to hear more about that journey and let people see the transition from creative talent to business leader.
Yeah, it has been a transition.
So how does that come about? Are you sitting there writing one day and all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and start a company and have people work for me now?
Well, you know what's so funny? My answer to that is kind of twofold. One, as a creative in 2024, the way times are, most creative people are entrepreneurs. We have to multitask and have a few different things that we're doing at any given time, because the industry has become really, I was going to say bifurcated, but I'll just say divided amongst the ways to actually get your voice out there, become well known, and also to have creative outlets that feel enriching to you. I think when I started, I always thought I'm a TV girly, I'm going to write television always, because I came up in the heyday of TV, when Mad Men was on and 30 Rock was on and Glee was on and these amazing shows. And I was like, that's going to be me. And then once the lull started and streaming started and the industry got really spread out, you as a creative begin to realize if I focus on one thing, it actually kind of puts me behind, because if that one thing kind of isn't popping, then you sort of feel a little stuck. So I started spreading into features. I started spreading into novellas and books. I started spreading into podcasts. And with that meant that there were a lot of things that I needed to manage. So initially I was like, I need assistance and support. But through that journey, I started meeting other creatives who were looking for ways to connect with each other. And I realized I had a reach into not only the creatives that I know now, but building bridges to storytellers for tomorrow. And I just realized I wasn't about to start a management company, but can I help support writers who are managing their own careers? Can I help them? Can I be a part of their journey? Can I give advice and or leadership or guidance, or even be a supportive arm as a supervisor on their projects to help them get their projects set up in different places? And that really just was not something that you do on nights and weekends. That's a full-time job. So in terms of starting the company, it really was like, okay, we are in the process of broadening out beyond what I do simply as a creative into how I can support other writers and creatives around me.
Yeah. From a leadership perspective, you're like, I'm going to start a business. And one of the goals around my business is to help other people have success in their businesses in life.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So double whammy? Exactly double whammy on that?
Right.
How do you go from entrepreneur, starting a business, starting a production company to supporting? I mean, how do you make the leap? There's a lot of risk in starting something new in general. And then to add all of this pressure around, I mean, I assume it's pressure, but helping other people be successful, that's two really big things at the same time.
They really are. But the thing that's funny, Lacey, is that I was already doing it. Like, I think that's something that I've even told my team. Like, obviously, as an artist, you have like agents, managers, all these people who are here to support your vision. And when I was starting to think like, okay, I think I'm going to set up a production company. So much of the work that production companies do, I was already doing, but without the banner of a production company. And so people were coming to me anyway saying, I have this great pitch. Would you like to be attached to it? I have this great idea, or there's this great writer I know, and they're just looking for some guidance, or I'm taking out this pitch. Would you mind listening to it? And me realizing like, oh, I'd love to be involved in that somehow, or I'm not the person to be involved, but I know who should be. Can I set you guys up? I was already doing all of this matchmaking ad hoc. And so when I approached HBO saying like, hey, look, here are the side projects that I'm already doing just as a creative who cares. Like I consider myself to be a compassionate creative. And by that, I mean, passionate creatives care about the work. Compassionate creatives care about the people as well. And that's so central to how I operate as an artist. And I realized like, oh, in this journey of being a compassionate creative, I was already doing all this side work that I was kind of like, can it be official? Can I, is it okay that I call it something that I start to say, like lay claim to like, this is a space that I want to be a part of forever. And I was so happy that they were supportive of it.
Yeah. So talk to me, hardest thing about being an entrepreneur. And then I'm going to ask you the hardest thing about being a compassionate creator. So 2 questions, same question for both though.
Great. And I might even just say more specifically for me, the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur who's also an artist, I would say is still leaving time for your art. And I think that could be generalized to other entrepreneurs to say like still leaving time for yourself. Because I tend to be someone, if it were just up to me, I would give back all day. And I think that you can deplete the well in many forms, you know, not just with time and lack of rest and lack of focus, but also the thing that makes people want to come to you to give back has to also exist. And so structuring my time so that I leave space to remain an artist, even as I'm, entrepreneuring and like supporting other artists is really important. And that's something that I recharge with my own work. And leaving time for that is a challenge, but something that I really enjoy making space for. And then the hardest thing about being a compassionate creative, honestly, is that not everybody is one. So I have encountered, and everyone in Hollywood has encountered people who are not as generous. And I think that affects me in a few ways. Sometimes I find that people, when you're telling people about the way you work, very often they're like, what? Nobody I know works that way. And they're sort of surprised and maybe slow to trust that you're serious when you say like, here's some notes. You can take them or leave them. Like you don't have to work with me, but I see something in your project and I just want more stories. So I'm never going to hold back from giving someone my feedback if they ask for it, even if I can't be directly involved or monetarily involved. And like, I'm just here to support. And people are always so like, what about that? And
we believe you.
Yes. And I'm like, it's so, I would say like Hollywood is littered with other shows that I'm not a part of that I've been like, well, here's 10 cents, you know, and I'm just like, spend it or don't, I don't care. But I want more stories. So I'm going to give my POV if you find it to be helpful. But then part 2, because other people don't always operate that way, I think sometimes I can be a little, I guess, over generous. Like, I think there are times where I'm like, that generosity doesn't always come back to me. And I don't mean it to say that other people are like mean or something, but I find that I tend to, thanks to a lot of therapy, operate from a place of like a spirit of abundance. And I think a lot of people in Hollywood and artistic mediums in general operate in a space of scarcity where they think that there's less. If I shared this with you, then I'm going to have less success. And I'm always like, success isn't pie. there's more to go around. Let me cut off another slice. It's a replenishing slice. So I think as a result, sometimes I find myself having to nurture my own projects more singularly. And I have to really try and ask for help when I need support, which is difficult for me.
Yeah, asking for help is difficult for most. And you've got a lot going on, so I get it. Same question, but different focus area. Hardest thing about being the boss?
Hardest thing about being a boss? That's a great question. I would say, especially for an early stage company, that so much of it has to originate from you. Like, you can delegate, but in terms of idea time, what we're doing, the quarterly goals and things like that, so much of it has to originate from you, because you're the quote unquote like visionary, which is like a big term. But I do think, like, if you're starting a company, it is your vision. So you always have to be checking in with yourself before you check in with your team. And that is hard. And then I think the second thing is, like, that's tied to that is people can't read your mind. So having to explain what's in your head over and over and over again to lots of different people, because it's not just to your direct reports, it's also to the team around you, and constantly having to be like, is what in my head? It was clear in my head, but now I've got to get it out. That's so much of the job. And that's why I'm so blessed to have such an amazing team that can do some of that legwork for me. But yeah, that is a hard part.
Yeah. Have any good stories around how you found the balance between doing work yourself, delegating, getting work done through others, just letting go and hoping and knowing that you have the right team in place? Any good stories or learnings that people would benefit from there?
I think the number one thing I learned is that I needed an assistant. Like, I couldn't do it by myself. And I think that there's this feeling of like, I'm starting it, I'm doing it alone. And I can't, if I had to rely on myself to schedule meetings, I would never get work done. I would be scheduling all day, because I'm a writer, and I want every email to be quirky and original and fun, and to have like jokes in it, and to show my personality. I was wasting so much time at the beginning of marching out on this endeavor, trying to be ever present to everyone. And I realized, like, I needed support. I needed help. I needed time that I could blinders down, eyes on my paper, do the work. I needed time to turn off the other voices. And I know not everyone can have an assistant. That's not something that is available to everyone. But, you know, AI is a powerful tool. There are AI assistants now. So I'm like, maybe get one of them. But I think Calendly is a great tool, not to give them an ad. But there are so many ways that you can figure out how to schedule your time. And I was drowning. I would say, like, I would wake up and I'd be like, okay, let me just answer some emails. And then suddenly the sun would be going down. And I'm like, oh no, all I did today was answer some emails. And I'm like, I have to work. So yeah, that's the biggest thing, is get some support as soon as you can.
How do you get to the place where you realized it was a challenge and not working? Like, what was that wall that you hit, or the moment you're like, I need to ask for help?
For me, as a creative, like, writing is my health line. You know, it's like I really have to write every week, even if not every day, to feel like whole as a human. And I kind of get the itch. Like, if I don't write for 3 or 4 weeks, I feel unwell and I'm moody and I like snap at people. And I'm like, oh, I need my fix. And so I've got to open final draft at least like 3 times a month. And so for me, that's what it was. I was in a funk. I felt like really uncreative and down. And I would go and people would ask, what are you working on? And I'm like, answering emails. You know? And I was like, this is not fun. And so yeah, it was really when I wasn't checking, like, getting that time with myself as an artist to check in about, like, what is my mission? Like, what is my vision? Like, what do I want to leave on this earth? What are the things that are making my heart beat on a daily basis? And it's being creative. So I had to start carving out that time, or else it'd be a very bad brunch date for the rest of my life.
Never. I can't believe it. I won't believe it. But you bring up something that is bigger than the work that you do, which is, putting good into the world and doing something that you're passionate and care about. I mean, you just articulated way better than I'm summarizing it. But the world is tough right now, right? And it has been. And I've got to assume putting content into the world feels like a really big job. How do you reconcile what's happening in the world, you as an entrepreneur and a business leader, and knowing that what you put out into the world, people are consuming and it has a really meaningful impact in a lot of ways, or it does for me and the people that I know who follow your work?
Yeah, I remember after 2016 election, waking up and feeling like so incredibly like lost and thinking like all of these stories I'm writing, do they even matter? Like who cares about vagina jokes when the world is beginning to crumble? And I remember saying this to a friend of mine who worked in finance, who was an iBanker. And she like hit me and was like, are you kidding? I need something to watch when I get home. She was just like, I need to get out of this. And I was just like, and I had a friend who campaigned for a candidate that did not win and was the same thing. She was like, thank God I have something to check out and like remember that there's hope in the world. And I realized, especially in the last few years, as we've seen the decline of like DEI and programs that support different looking people and support the world as it actually is, how it actually looks, we're seeing this roll back to a sort of classic structure of what television and features used to be. It's like reflecting one version of the world instead of how the world actually looks. To me, I realize like it becomes my social imperative, my necessary calling, my beautiful burden to tell stories about people who look like me, because we're here. Like just because they're not being displayed all the time doesn't mean we can be erased. So I really was like, in times like these, as hard as it is, and as many doors are being closed in the faces of creatives of color, and as many like opportunities are being taken away, it actually makes me double down and say, oh, okay, you don't want my story? Well, fuck you. I'm going to figure out a way to make it. Pardon my language, but I use adult language when I talk about adult topics, and seeing yourself as an adult topic, needing to be seen as an adult topic. And so for me, it's so important that in times like these, we actually breed more community and find each other so that we can say, hey, your stories are valid. They might not think it's not, but they're not here forever. We are. So we have to be able to find more ways to get our messages across, even if it's not in the customary ones that we've been used to.
I love that. One of the things that I want to make sure people pull from that is in their situation, whether they're out of college, in their first job, or breaking into the creative world, or long established in the creative world, how do they learn from your experience and that, taking the risk and being willing to walk away when there are a lot of people depending on you? How do they get to that place? How do they start to think differently, or how do they start to act on what they've been thinking?
Yeah, I think one of the number one things I learned when I was starting this industry is the only real power you have is your ability to say no. And you have to build yourself a foundation that makes you okay with saying no to things that don't align with you. And I remember I started indie. Like I started in entertainment by writing four web series. I wrote for Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl and created a few web series of my own before I was ever an assistant. And so I knew how to, even though I had a film school background, like the formal background, I also knew how to create my own content. And I believe in the rules of, the musical Hamilton. When Alexander Hamilton says, I wrote my way out, I'm like, I have to write my way out. Like if anything goes wrong in my career, the only way out is through, and you have to keep creating the next opportunity. So I think because of that indie spirit, I realized that like it gave me a comfort, I would say an uncomfortable comfort in saying no to things. Like it's never easy to say no to something, but to say like, yeah, well, this doesn't work out, I'll do this. And so when people are starting out in that first job, I think there are two things to remember. Not only that, it's probably going to be hard no matter what you do. You might as well choose your hard and choose a path that excites you, because there's no such thing as an easy job. The word job is there. That's hard. So it's like, I always tell people, you could be a miserable accountant or a miserable writer, but either way, there's going to be hard. So choose the path that is the hard you want. And then also, I would say it's not have a plan B, but give yourself a foundation. So if you know, for instance, the entertainment industry is really rough right now, I would actually venture to advise people, do something else and shore up your funds, like save money, get ready. So that once you enter this industry, you don't need to hit within 3 months, because it's most likely not going to happen. We're in marathon zone. This is not a sprint. So how can you shore up a foundation around you so that the first thing that comes along, if it's not right for you, you can say no?
Yeah. Choose hard. I love that. I'm probably going to borrow it. I'm telling you right now.
No worries.
Do you have an example of you doing that? Good story for us?
Oh, all the time. Like, yes, every single day I'm choosing my heart. It's just like, I'm constantly being like, are we doing this or are we doing this? But I think early on, I would say a moment where I was sort of like, choose your heart was when I was deciding that I really wanted to direct more. And I've been directing like plays and web series and things like that on the side of my career. And I've been writing on Insecure. And I was so scared to tell them like that I was a director and I really wanted to direct. And so I did a convoluted thing where I was like, which is harder, talking to my bosses or shooting something on my own? And at the time, emotionally, it was easier for me to shoot something on my own, which sounds crazy because it was very hard. But I've always been someone, probably to my detriment, and this is just part of being a woman, where you always are like, I have to prove I can do it. I've done it before I asked for the opportunity. And so that's what I did. I went and I wrote and directed and produced a short film with the help of an amazing crew and got that done. And then literally coming back from that break and going back onto Insecure, I knew at that point that it was less hard for me to ask. And I know that's crazy to think of it that way, because I think I always believe in the tenet, like, do things before you're ready, because by the time you're ready, someone else will have already done them. So do it before you're ready. But for me, I just was so scared that I had to prove it to myself first. And it was harder in some ways to do it on my own. But now that I know, now that I did, I know that I can. And I always can again. And I have again, over and over, gotten the opportunity to direct or produce shorts on my own, because now I've tackled that hard, and I don't just have the Hollywood way of doing things. I know you can do things less expensively and still get your story across. So that's one example.
It's a good example, and it's interesting when we unpack it. It's all about agency, right? It's all about, do I feel confident in asking for what I want, speaking up, or having an opinion on these things? And when I think about you and I see your work and I see you lead, there's so much agency in everything you do. And I mean that in the best way. To hear you walk through that train of thought doesn't really reconcile for me. So it's, here is this person that we'll go and figure out how to navigate and knock down every wall to create a film and direct it and do all this on her own, rather than having a conversation with their bosses. Now this person who has, 15, 20 things out in the world that you're working and moving through, some in a supporting role, some of a leading role, some of them in a different creative role. It's just so interesting to hear sort of what goes on internally to get you to those places and those transitions and the steps that you've taken, because that's not how I see you. And I'm guessing that's not how the world sees you. Because I just think about somebody who's got a lot of agency, knows what they want to do, and says, I'm going to make this work. And if you don't like it, don't have to watch.
Yeah. I'm like, but I always like to dispel the myth that people who appear confident are confident 24/7. 365. I definitely think that, as women, there are real moments of imposter syndrome. And even there are also moments where you're confident in yourself, but the world is not confident in you. And that is tragic in itself. So I think as if you will, like a double minority, a Black woman, like the odds are even stacked further against me. So there are definitely times where I feel that I have this, I got to prove to you that I can do it. And there are also times where I would say I do have this mentality of I want to make it so that any reason you have to say no to me, I've already looked through. I want you to look dumb saying no to me. So sometimes when I take a look at a situation, I say, okay, here are the 10 different ways that this could go. Here are the 10 different people they've given opportunities to. How do I combat each of those things so that if they say no to me, they just kind of look like an idiot? So that's where I always got it. I still remember when I was an assistant trying to do everything that when I saw the people who were getting staffed for the first time, getting that first like sexy TV writing job, I was like, how do I get that job? And I would look at the credentials that people had. And I was like, oh, okay, you've done improv, you had an online presence, you went to film school, you have won a competition, check. I'm going to do all those things so that once I get to that level where I'm being decided on, someone would have to go, well, she's hit every box. Like what, how do we say no to her? And I know part of that is like, just like an immigrant / Virgo ability to overwork. I will be honest and say I'm a double Virgo and I'm a child of immigrants. So I know how to hold down some work, but I also think that it gives me confidence. It's something that really does make me feel sure about myself when I know that like I've done all the things and now I just have to wait for success to come my way.
So hugely inspiring and almost a little exhausting. So how do you get to the place with the level of success that you have where you're like, I don't have to push that hard or fight so hard? Or are you not there yet? Or are you going to get to a place where you can actually recognize that you've had all of this success and it should be easier?
That's a great question, Lacey. I don't think I'm there yet. And I gotta be honest, I watched Beyonce's documentary where even she was having to convince people to agree with her. I don't know if we get there. I think we can choose moments to rest. Like we can say like this year is for restoration, or we can say this month I'm not taking on any more projects. But I think when you're going, you're going. And I know that that's like sort of like you said, it's an exhausting proposition. Like what? You don't get to rest. But I also think in the creative field, the crazy thing about this path I've chosen is I say it all the time where I'm like, there are no golf days in my future. Like there are CEOs that the higher up you get, the less you work. Eventually you're just managing the portfolio and showing up at the quarterly reports and then golf, And I'm like, being a creative means that the higher up you get, the more you work. And that is something that I'm like, I didn't realize when I started on this path. I was like, oh no, I'm like, all my bosses are so tired. But I'm also like, at the end of the day, it's building a beautiful life at the same time, because when you are a consistently working creative who has a lot of irons in the fire and has some regular things that you can return to, you are able to schedule those periods of rest. Like in television, there's a period called hiatus. It's when you work on a regular show and the show comes back, the show is coming back. You have 3 months in between seasons where you literally can rest. And it's like a summer break.
Except we both know you don't rest.
I personally don't, but that's because I actually, run a company. So unfortunately, there aren't really those periods. But I do think that building in intentional moments in your day and your week and your month is the only way to continue in the productivity journey. Like I think rest is part of productivity. And it's been an adjustment for me. And I sometimes still adjust, like every now and then. Like just this past weekend, I had awards on Saturday and a fundraising event on Sunday. And I was like, oh, so no weekend, and I was like, that's unfortunate. But I also am looking forward and going, next weekend, that is my weekend, and I'm like, I get to rest. And so I try not to overschedule myself. I try and leave unavailability in my calendar. I schedule my writing time, all of this stuff, because I think part of the unfortunate hustle culture that has resulted in this industry, because it's been vertically integrated and all these companies are pushing down prices and the streaming wars have ruined the industry and blah, 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 is that we all are working harder than we ever have before. So you have to build and rest in bites and consistent bites to stay full, because taking a week or a month or 3 months is not quite the norm these days.
intentionally finding that time of rest and replenishment and all of that sounds like something you've worked through over the years. What are some of your other bigger challenges that you face, less as a creative and more as a leader and manager of people?
Yeah, I would say consistent feedback with your team is something that has been so important for me to build in. I decided pretty early on, I've worked on shows where I saw writers who didn't know if they were coming back the next season to a returning show. And the bosses wouldn't tell them until the last minute. And then they're over here saying, well, I could have been looking for a job. Like, I had no idea. And I realized, like, there's this fear when creatives become leaders, you're basically asking people who are socially awkward their entire lives to manage people. As a self-proclaimed introvert, I had to learn how to come out of my shell and build in feedback, like metrics, and build in, like, we at SuperSpecial, we do our reviews quarterly to try and take the stigma out of it. Like, we're not just talking once a year. I think that's, like, so strange to only get one-on-one time with your boss or your team about their progress once a year. So we tend to do quarterly, and we review each other. My employees review me just like I review them. And we talk through ways to grow the company. I think everyone in the company should have a say in that. It's not just the people at the top. So it's important to us. We even talk to our interns, like, what are the things that you see us doing that you want us to do better? What are the areas that you see us missing? So we build in those sort of feedback structures regularly right from the get-go, and let people know that this is part of our culture. So not to take the stigma off of giving and receiving feedback.
No surprises. I always tell leaders I'm working with, if you're saying something in a performance review conversation for the first time, you haven't done your job.
Yeah, I agree.
No surprises. Yeah. Well, have you been surprised? Speaking of surprises, have you been surprised by any feedback that you've gotten from the team?
Can I say no? I haven't. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's like we're constantly talking. So it's like even if my team has said like even critique, I'm always like, yep, yeah. I'm rarely surprised by what I hear because we are in constant communication. I also think on that communication front, I'm a big believer in, like, safety in the workplace, and not just physical safety, but like emotional safety to fail. And so I make it very clear with my team, like, I'm not you messed one thing up today, you're fired. That's just not my energy. It's too hard to hire. So I'm like, why would we do this? So to me, that safety also is admitting your mistakes. And I am someone who admits my mistakes. I let my team know I fucked this up, and here's what I need to change, and here's how I plan to do it. How can you guys support me? How can I support you? So we talk about these things all of the time. So I have yet to receive, not that it'll never happen, but I've yet to receive feedback that surprised me. I usually am like, yeah, we've been talking about this. That makes a lot of sense.
Or somebody who does what I do for a living, what I'm excited by is that the feedback is integrated into what you're doing every day, it sounds like. So it's a non-thing. It's a non-event. It makes the risk, It takes the scary out because it's just happening. And it's part of the culture, and it's what you're creating in terms of those relationships. So when something does go wrong or something does go right, it's not this big thing. It's okay, let's admit it, let's talk about it, and let's figure out our way forward rather than we don't have these conversations. I screwed up. I need to hide it. I need to figure out who to blame. And I sure as shit am not figuring out how to move forward because that means I've done something wrong.
Yeah, I think it's important to get it out into the open because it's like a rot. Like, if you don't talk about the issue, then it's coloring their decisions and nobody knows why. So no one knows what you're reacting to in another moment where something else goes wrong. So I even try and admit that. And again, I think a lot of it is the power of, like, a good therapist and, like, going through, like, why am I feeling this way about this, and unpacking things where I can say, hey, I reacted this way to something you said yesterday, and it had nothing to do with what you did. It actually has to do with this
the last time this happened, before you were even hired, where this other thing occurred. And so I just wanted you to know that. And I'm working through that. It's like I can say that. And I'm like, there's something very valuable about that. I've seen some memes recently, I wanted to say, about millennial bosses and how like chill they are because we were broken by the generation above us. And I am sort of like, yeah, we're so like, hey, are you feeling good? Because I just want you to chill. I'm like, that is me. I'm just kind of like, I want my team to feel open to talk to me about their mistakes and their failures as well as their successes. I want them to brag on themselves when they did something well. And I want them to take accountability when they did something in a suboptimal way. Like we all have to be having those conversations.
It's funny how you define chill, I define as management. Leading, right? It's expectations and accountability, right?
Right.
So if we're doing those things and having those conversations and saying those things, people know what success looks like. Yeah. And they know when they've done things that contribute to that success. And they know when they've done things that haven't worked out and hopefully figure out how to do them differently next time.
Okay.
That's leadership. That's less chill for me and more like, hey, do what you're supposed to do as the boss.
Yeah. You'd be surprised how many people, especially in my industry, they believe leadership is holding back critique and not giving feedback and keeping the hard things to themselves, like letting the team not know what's going on. It happens a lot. I've both worked on shows and heard from friends who have worked on shows where information is hoarded at the top. And they're like, I could help my boss if they just told me what they needed. And when I ask, they say, I can't help. And I'm sort of like, but they're like, but I've worked on a show where this happened before and I have the tools. I just have to be empowered to do it. And like literally so many places don't work this way. I think it is the ideal way. But it's not common.
What's the driver behind that? It seems like such an easy thing, but it sounds like it's something that gets in the way. So what stops people from that transparency? What leads to that hoarding?
Not to keep going back to therapy, but I do think that it's the types of people who become leaders in this field. Very often, you were writing alone for a very long time. And then the thing you wrote alone ended up giving you financial success. And you think to yourself, well, I keep having to do it alone because that's what worked. Delegation is something that is learned, and it comes from, really supporting that inner child that thinks that solitude is the only way to be safe, and really saying, actually, no, it's by sharing. It's by sharing and admitting you need help. Admitting you need help is the strong thing to do. And I think a lot of creatives are thrust into this position of being a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company off of a thing they wrote alone in their room. And so it's really hard to transition to like, 200 people. I have to run up like 200 people's lives after just running my own. That's a struggle. So that's why I think that every person who makes that leap, I'm a very big believer in therapy because I think it's getting in touch with your number one character, you. And if you get in touch with you, you get better at what you do. And you get better at people. So I'm a big believer in that. But I think that's part of it. It's a lot of people who are used to going at it alone, thinking that that's the only way.
I love the iteration of growth that you talk about, that's sort of woven into all of your stories. When you think about yourself as a business leader, as a creative, as a leader in general of industry, what do you hope for yourself in the next 2-5 years? What do you continue to work on? What do you see as your biggest movement forward?
Yeah, what we've seen in the entertainment industry over the last 2 years has been a contraction of content, and it's a deeply affected comedy in general, which is my main genre that I love the most. And what I'd love to see is a correction, like for the contraction to come to an end, for less people to lose their jobs, for the streaming wars to figure out that we do need advertising and to bring ads back because it's the only way that they made money. Why did they get rid of them? And then from that to see us rebalance, because I do think if we can correct and not just keep contracting, but find this balance again, we can have better stories again. I think that the push towards all of the IP-driven stories that tend to start to feel hollow over time, because it's like, I've seen this before. It's just a different Chris as the star. It really like decays our need for content. And I have to be honest, I think this push is detrimental to society because we actually do need spaces to rest, to relax, to laugh, to experience joy, to have undifficult consumption of content. Like, it is important that we have television. It is important for our culture that we have film, that we have things that we all can say, I saw that, let's talk about it, that we have commonalities because it helps society be better. So what I'd love to see over the next 2 to 5 years is a resurgence of comedy. I think if they take our love for laughter, we lose. So we have to laugh to feel light and to get through our days. So I'd love to see a resurgence in comedy. That's the number one thing. And for me personally, as a company, I would love to be the source of that. I have such a network of incredible writers that I love and want to see succeed through the program that I started, Tribe, which is leading writing fellows, most of whom write comedy. I would love to see them all thriving because, not only do they deserve it because they're good people, they're compassionate creatives, but also because the world deserves these stories. The world deserves stories about different types of people. And come on, you deserve to laugh.
We do deserve to laugh, and you always make me laugh. It's you are funny. What strikes me there as well is that you're talking about your business, but you're also talking about the world and the good you're putting into the world, which is amazing. And you don't often see those true values come together in the way that you speak to it, which I've got to believe is one of the reasons why you've had the success that you had. When you care deeply about putting good out there and work really hard to get there, it's clear that the outputs are what we're seeing from you. So take that lens, transition it to the early career professional that hears you, is inspired by you. What should we leave them with? What should they be thinking about? What should they go do differently?
Oh, that's interesting. I think, I mean, some of the things that I've mentioned already in terms of like building yourself a foundation, so that if the industry tells you no, you're okay. And so that you can often, or sometimes when necessary, tell the industry no and be okay is the number one thing I would say. Number two, figure out what you want to tell stories about. I think there are lots of people who go to film school and know the technicality of craft that it takes to build something. But I would say, what do you want? What mark do you want to leave on the world? What stories? What are the types of stories you want to tell? So if you are still in school, I would say to take a class that just interests you, that has nothing to do with your major, that was nothing, so that you can become obsessed with the topic that you start to tell stories about. And then in terms of leadership and connecting with other entrepreneurs, I think it's also important to remember to stay connected to people who do what you do in other lanes and in other fields. So for instance, I have close friends who work in consulting. I have close friends who work in M&A. I have friends who work in just other fields that are non-creative. And we're going through the same shit. You know, it's like the same problems, the same, but their solutions to my shit might be different than mine for them because we're coming at it from different ways. So I really believe in not having a homogenous friends group, because your friends really are your network. I think networking gets like a stink on it. And it's not so much about networking. It's about building genuine relationships with people who you see eye to eye, even if they don't do what you do. And also those who want exactly what you want, because you're all going to grow together. The tenet that I like to stay with is network across. It's like the people next to you are going to bring in more of the best opportunities that could ever come your way than the people above you. It's just the truth. Everything great that I've gotten has been from someone next to me. So remember that your network are your friends and stay in touch with your friends.
Spend time investing, put some in because it always pays out. Yeah.
Exactly.
I am positive that all of our listeners are going to pull huge nuggets from this conversation. Not only did I enjoy it, but I was inspired by it. And I'm thrilled to see what you continue to do. And I know all of our listeners are going to watch and learn and continue to consume the beauty you put out into the world. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thanks, Amy. What I'm left with is, how do you find the confidence to know how good you really are and show the world? How do you build better conscious moments of rest? And how do you lead in a way that's consistent, with who you are, both personally and professionally. This is Unfolding Leadership, and see you next season and for the recap episode. Thanks for joining us on this ride of season 2.